Oh, thank you, Erin. But we'll just go ahead and get started. It looks like there's still some folks joining the call, but we definitely want to be respectful of everyone's time. But good morning and welcome to the our ELAC meeting today. Just as a reminder, just make sure to oh, thank you, Erin. Just as a reminder, please mute yourselves unless you're speaking or responding to questions. Definitely feel free to use the chat to post questions. We do have some Q&A, dedicated throughout this meeting as well. Definitely reach out to the community engagement team if you encounter any technical difficulties along the way. You can use their email address or you can reach out through the chat. So, because we have a pretty full agenda, what we'd like to do is just do some chat box introductions today. So if you could please in the chat share your name, where you're located, and your role. Maybe let us know if you're an ELAC member, a regional advisor, or a member of the public. That would be great. And so just give a few minutes for everyone to introduce themselves through the chat. Great, I see introductions are coming through. Give another minute or so just for everyone to have opportunity to introduce themselves through the chat. Great. Yeah, well, please continue with the introductions, but we will move forward. And just to let everyone know here today, Lois Martin, I know most of you know, who's a member of our ELAC Executive Committee. She will be joining us around 11 o'clock this morning. She is presenting at an early childhood conference at the moment. So she'll be in around 11 and she'll join us for the remainder of that time. Before we launch into the agenda, we did want to take a few minutes to share some news with everyone here. And this is news about Deanna Stewart. And I think as many of you know, Deanna Stewart has been the leader of the community engagement. She's Deputy Director of Community Engagement. And you'll notice that Deanna is not here with us today. And we'd like to share the reason why she is not with us today. And so what I'm going to be doing is just reading a statement that Deanna has prepared to explain the reason for her absence. So here's her statement. Dear ELAC, I wanted to share with you that I was recently laid off from my position here at Dcyf. I've spent 12 years building this career and couldn't have done it without ELAC. This council is where it all began. My career achievements are credited to the encouragement and support I received while working with ELAC members and regional advisors all these years. Authentic engagement was not just my job. It is my passion. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to have worked with you, learned from you, and most importantly, fought for you. Thank you for the continued support and for the friendships I've gained along the way. Until our paths cross again, Deanna. We just wanted to share that with you so that that statement from Deanna, so that you're aware a little bit about what has taken place. Also, wanted to give space as well in case there were any questions. I know for some of you here who've been involved with ELAC for a number of years, I know looking at some names for 9 or 10 years in certain positions and roles, Deanna has been a fixture throughout that entire time in community engagement and serving as a fierce advocate and passionate leader in early learning. And so we recognize that this is difficult news to hear, and wanted to just give a little space for the sharing. And so I'm going to stop talking and just give space. And if there is feedback or comments, also give opportunity for everyone here to share.
I just want to jump in really quick. I know that we had several questions and comments in the executive session about this, and I have gotten approval to share her personal email address in the chat for anybody that wants to connect with her offline, just per our conversation in the executive session. So I'm going to share that in the chat, and I've been given permission to share that with all of you with an invitation to connect with her if you'd like.
Great. Thank you, Deanna, for sharing Deanna's email address in the chat. So again, just wanted to share the news, give space. If questions come up during the meeting, don't hesitate to reach out. But if there's no questions or comments at this time, I think what we'll do is just continue to move forward with the meeting. Great. And so I believe everyone should have received copies of the August ELAC meeting minutes. Should have been sent out in advance, placed on the DCYF website, and I know that they have now just been placed into the chat box. And what we'd like to do at this moment is just give a few minutes now for everyone to review those minutes before we actually vote on those minutes. So let's take a few minutes at this time to take a look at those meeting minutes from August. Just going to give about maybe 1 or 2 more minutes. Okay. Hopefully everyone's had enough time to review those minutes. I think what we'll do next is we'll vote on those August meeting minutes. And as a reminder, only ELAC members and regional advisors can vote. So if you can, please place your vote in the chat. You can indicate thumbs up, thumbs sideways. So thumbs up meaning you agree, thumbs sideways meaning you can live with it, or thumbs down. And it's fine to write your vote into the chat if you do not have the symbols to use. So can ELAC members and regional advisors please vote at this time? And Erin, just let me know when you've captured the vote.
Thanks, Gary. See you in a bit. Looks like we have almost everyone's. I think we might be missing 1 or 2. Maybe they had to step away, but I think we have almost everyone. So I think
You're
that's
good.
probably
Okay.
good.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. So next on the agenda is our feedback loop. And the feedback loop, and is an example of a standing item at ELAC meetings. It's a way to provide updates and follow up on questions that are raised during previous ELAC meetings. You should have received a copy of the October feedback loop by email, and I believe it has now been, a link has been placed into the chat box to be able to access that document. What we'll do at this time is we'll just take give a few minutes for everyone to review that document and allow opportunity for any questions. Just quickly, you know, as you're looking through that document, you'll see a lot of updates as it relates to the DCYF decision packages, you know, including ECAP expansion and, excuse me, supporting providers to increase childcare access. So a lot of things related to the decision packages. You'll also see some updates as it relates to FSKA, Temporary Licensing Subcommittee. So let's just take a few minutes to take a look at that. And again, if you have questions, feel free to place those in the chat.
Oh, thanks for pointing that out, Val. It looks like that is the August feedback loop,
Oh,
the October one. Let's see.
great. Thank you, Val.
Here we go. I'm putting the October one in the chat. Sorry about that, guys. Thanks for catching that, Val.
Great. So hopefully everyone's able to access that. I had a hard copy printed out, so I didn't realize that was the incorrect link. So we'll give a couple minutes for everyone to take a look through those. And again, if you have questions, feel free to place those questions into the chat. Okay, I'll give one more minute just for folks to take a look through the feedback loop. Again, if there are any questions, just place those in the chat or feel free to unmute and ask your question as well. That is fine. And I know I actually have one question, Erin, maybe you can address related to FSKA Temporary Licensing Subcommittee. Just noticing the attendees for those sessions. Notice that oftentimes you can tell that there's a center-based provider that's been in attendance. Curious to know if there's been changes in terms of attendance by licensed family home providers or family friend and neighbor caregivers at those meetings.
I think I can field that question, Enrica. This was one of my first meetings with that group, and in a conversation and follow-up afterward with Emily before she left for leave, we did talk about that felt like it was a low attended meeting. We started opening up a conversation about different ways that we could maybe encourage more attendees and membership, but we didn't really come up with anything that kind of stuck. As far as attendance of the licensed family homes and so on and so forth, I'm not 100% sure, but I can follow up with that, and I'll definitely get some data on what those numbers have been over the last meeting 2 or 3, and then maybe in one of our future committees we can kind of address this a little further. So hopefully that answers your question.
Great, thank you for the update, Eric.
Yeah, this is a good opportunity to let everybody know that, so Eric LaFontaine, he is a relatively new member of the CE team. He's been here for a few months, and as Emily is on, sorry for the squeaky, as Emily's on maternity leave, enjoying time with her little baby, Eric's taking over the FSKA work and some of the other pieces that she's been handling. So he's a great resource to reach out to for that subcommittee, and you'll be seeing his face in other meetings as well.
Great. So if there are no other questions related to the feedback loop, we will transition to the state agency and partner updates first. And the state agency and partner updates, these are an example of another standing item at ELAC meetings. And hopefully you've had the opportunity to review this document in advance of the meeting, as there's a lot of information contained in the updates. Thank you, Jessica, for placing those in a link into the chat to access those updates. So give just a few minutes for folks to review those. You'll notice in that document, you'll see updates from the Department of Social and Health Services, the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction, Department of Health as well. And there might be representatives here from those groups that can address questions that you have today. So let's take a few minutes and review those. And if there are any questions, feel free to place those into the chat or raise your hand and we can address those directly.
I also wanted to pop in that I know that some of these were hyperlinked in the feedback loop, but we do have standalone update docs from the early learning shop to go along with the feedback loop. So I'm putting those links in the chat, even though I think that they were also linked in the original doc, but just to be safe. I don't know why that link is so long, but it is.
We'll give another minute for folks to review. And again, if there are any questions, just place those in the chat. And it looks like there are no questions at this time. So we're just going to continue to forge forward, but if questions do crop up, just let us know. Next, we're going to talk about the Regional Coalition and updates from Washington Communities for Children. These are also examples of standing item at ELAC meetings, and it really gives opportunities for the regions to share updates that they have. Thank you, Jessica, for putting the link to that. There are definitely representatives here from many of the regions and would like to extend an invitation to any regional advisors if they'd like to share additional information about activities that are occurring in their respective regions. Please feel free to unmute and do so. And I know Colleen is here to talk briefly about the Washington Communities for Children and provide us all with a quick update as it relates to that.
Thank you, Enrica. This is Colleen. Sorry, I have my camera off. The sun is just like right in my eyes in my office coming in the window. And so it's very distracting and hard to be on camera. So my apologies about that. The major update coming from Washington Communities for Children is that we just completed last week our inaugural conference named Beyond Connection. We hosted numerous sessions in our different network areas and had some great engagement with some new folks as well as those who have been participating in our network. And then we are also onboarding fellows from the Pathways Washington placement with our policy and advocacy team. And I believe, oh yes, and then also that we voted in August to add a 7th network to our structure called Childcare Voice. That group is a group specifically for childcare providers, whether it is center, family, home, or FFN, to come together collectively and share resources, information, and other engagement that they so choose. And so I think that is everything.
Great, thank you, Colleen. Colleen, are you able to speak a little more about, maybe give a brief description about what Pathways Washington is?
Yes, I will do my best. I am learning as that all starts too. So if there is somebody present that has more information, don't at all hesitate to join. Well, you know what? Actually, I don't think I have the information here in front of me, so I don't want to misspeak on their program. I really have only been briefed on kind of what my role will be with our new fellow. Enrica, do you actually have more information on that program?
I just have very general information. I know that Pathways Washington creates sort of pathways for leaders of color to hold roles in decision-making in early learning, in early childhood systems. That's my understanding, so that they are helping to drive and shape the design of policies that impact communities. So it's a, I've had a chance to skim through some things in the link, but I think it's a really interesting organization to take a closer look at and learn more about. Thank you, Colleen, for putting that in the link into the chat.
Yeah, I just dropped the link to their About section from their website in the chat. And my apologies, I said Pathways and I meant to say Pathwaves. But yes, that's the link to their About in the chat.
Great, thank you. And thank you again, Colleen, for providing us with that great update about the work from WCFC. Just want to check in, are there any regional advisors here who would like to share anything about the work in their respective regions? Great, so it looks like there's no further updates at this time. So I think with that, can move on, or maybe I'll check in with Erin first. Is Jess here to present on the trauma-informed care, or do we need to wait until 11 o'clock?
Looks like we don't have her here yet. So,
Erin, I can see if I can get a hold of them.
sure.
Great.
And if we're wrapping up this section, we can also take a 10-minute breather.
We certainly could. Maybe we can wait to see if they're joining, but yes, otherwise we'll give everyone a little bit of a break.
All right, Jess is headed over.
Oh, wonderful. Let's see, Aaron, I'm not able to see everyone, but I noticed it looks like an additional person has arrived. Is that Jess?
It's me, folks. How's it going?
Perfect. Okay. Good
morning.
Let's do some formal introductions here. So we ended our previous section a little bit early, and so we're very appreciative that you were able to join us a few minutes sooner than you were expecting. But I'd like to introduce Jess Meyer. She's DCYF's Early Learning Trauma-Informed Professional Development Coordinator. And Jess is here today to provide us with some updates and input on the DCYF Financial Awards for early childhood professionals who are acquiring training on trauma-informed care. And also Jess is here to provide us with input on the various efforts to create trauma-informed professional competencies. So thank you, Jess, for joining us this morning, and I will let you take it away.
Thanks so much for your time. And I'm really excited to be here today. It's such an exciting time for trauma-informed approaches in general. So I just really value your time today. And I'm excited to hear from you about strategies for growing trauma-informed supports for early childhood professionals. And thanks also to Nicole for sending me a little instant message that it was time to be here. So as I said, this is a really exciting opportunity with the Fair Start for Kids Act, which I think all of you are likely familiar with. It was passed last year. We are moving forward with a whole host of offerings, and we're doing a bunch of engagement too. So at the tail end of today's discussion, I'd love to hear from you about what types of supports would be helpful. So we've set aside some time here at the tail end of our discussion today to do breakouts and talk about what you think would be helpful in terms of financial awards specifically that could be beneficial, what types of financial awards should be distributed for growing trauma-informed knowledge, skills and abilities, and what types of trainings could be helpful, etc. Before we get into that, however, I'm going to discuss just very briefly a couple of frameworks associated with trauma-informed care, how we define trauma-informed care, because I find that it can be helpful for us all to have a shared language and understanding as we engage in these conversations. So with that, I'm just going to pop into a couple of slides that talk about what trauma-informed care is specifically as defined by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Association, which is fairly frequently cited when we're talking about trauma-informed care. The SAMHSA, as we call it, has been super helpful in putting out a whole host of specific literature, et cetera, around trauma-informed care. So I often reference SAMHSA's frameworks when we're talking about these efforts. So before we jump into your ideas about how best to grow trauma-informed care, let's talk about what a trauma-informed approach looks like on the ground. That's a question I get. It's like, yeah, great, Jess, of course, everybody wants to be trauma-informed, but what does that even mean, right? So we'll talk about that now. So as stated by SAMHSA, specifically a trauma-informed organization and also trauma-informed individuals for that matter, this can apply for an organization or an individual. Somebody or something that is trauma-informed, first of all, realizes the widespread impact of trauma and understands the potential paths for recovery. So when we're talking about realizing the widespread impact of trauma, we're talking about understanding what it looks like in ourselves even, right? So having a truly trauma-informed approach really it involves some self-reflection too. So understanding what trauma could look like with our colleagues, understanding what trauma looks like in the people we work with and the kids and families we serve. So that's the first R, is just to realize the impacts of trauma. The second R is to recognize the signs and symptoms of trauma and the folks we walk alongside, whether it's the people we serve in our childcare centers, among family, friends, and neighbors providers. Within DCYF, we have trauma, right? So we need to recognize the signs and symptoms of trauma in clients, families, staff, and others involved with the system specifically. And, as we talk about trauma-informed care, we talk a lot about triggers, for example, and understanding that behaviors adults perceive as challenging are often can be trauma responses. Right? So when we talk about trauma, it's cultivating that kind of understanding about what's happening underneath, meeting people where they're at, and understanding that trauma can cause a whole host of things that adults perceive as challenging, specifically when we're working with kids. The third R is trauma-informed individual or entity responds by fully integrating knowledge about trauma into policies, procedures, and our practices, right? And so that's what we're up to now for the Fair Start for Kids Act, is we're having conversations with folks such as you about how best do we respond to trauma. Again, just noting that this is such an exciting opportunity with the Fair Start for Kids Act to respond to trauma. And then finally, and maybe most importantly, is a trauma-informed individual or entity actively seeks to resist re-traumatization. So that's the big one, right? We don't want to hurt people more than they've already been hurt. So that's a really important thing for us to think about. So we can think about these 4 R's as a roadmap to the increasing provision of trauma-informed care. And I'm thinking many of you are engaging in trauma-informed approaches, or you've seen trauma-informed approaches within your everyday work, or even within, when you go into different healthcare providers, for example. There are many examples of what trauma-informed care looks like. And we can talk about that when we go into breakouts today too. We'll talk about what you would like to see, maybe that you've witnessed already before that's trauma-informed. How do we replicate those good things that we've seen? So as this is a roadmap, the 6 key principles specifically, which is the next slide, it can be conceptualized as road signs to the increasing provision of trauma-informed care. So we're getting closer, right? So this is just another framework when we think about what trauma-informed approaches look like. We think about these 6 key principles. And again, this was put forward by SAMHSA specifically. These principles, including safety, trustworthiness, transparency, peer support, collaboration, mutuality, empowerment, voice, and choice, and equity. Each of these specific principles anchor a host of practices that we can apply when we are working to further trauma-informed approaches. So for example, when we're thinking about safety in the early childhood world, we can think about making sure there are orderly transitions between classroom activities, making sure that kids have a safe space to store their belongings. Collaboration and mutuality, if we think about that key principle too, it could look like partnering with families to plan strategies for helping a child calm down when they're triggered by an event that scares them. So when we start digging deeper into each one of these principles, we can find a host of practices that we may employ to become trauma-informed. And so that's why I find these frameworks especially helpful, is they just give us some parameters. And so when we go into breakouts in a little bit, we can potentially think about these principles and the R's specifically as a framework for us to think about how to grow trauma-informed approaches. So before we dig into the specifics of the Fair Start for Kids Act and how much money is there and some of the important discussion, what I'd like to do is cover a really important additional theme within our work. So trauma-informed care has always been holistic. It's always been something that we think about, not just within the people we serve, externally facing. We also want to embody it within our own agency, within DCYF, within our own programs, within our own, the way we work with our colleagues. It's a really holistic approach. And the healing-centered approach highlights the fact that this work has to be done in a community, in a collective. Trauma does not happen in a vacuum, usually. Most of the time, oftentimes, trauma stems from relationship-based interactions, and that's among the reasons why it's so important that we facilitate healing within a collective. And again, thinking about how a program, whether it be an early child care program or FFN providers or within DCYF for that matter, we want to think about a holistic movement. The healing-centered approach really emphasizes that holistic movement to the increasing work that we want to do here. And so as discussed by Dr. Sean Ginwright, who coined this term back in 2018, a healing-centered approach is holistic. It involves culture, spirituality, civic action, and collective healing. A healing-centered approach views trauma not simply as an individual isolated experience, but rather highlights the ways in which trauma and healing are experienced collectively. So as we enter into these conversations about the Fair Start for Kids Act, or continue these conversations, I really love to emphasize the importance that this is all of our responsibility. And so just to emphasize that we're in this together. And so we, DCYF and existing partner conversations, I've heard a lot from folks about the importance of engaging in this healing-centered approach and incorporating that within all of our trauma-informed work. And so when you see us talking about trauma-informed care, we'll see specifically trauma-informed and healing-centered throughout the material that we're working through right now. And so with that, let's talk about some important stuff, some more important stuff, which is the money, right? So what are we doing? And again, we're going to ask you for your input about this here as we get into the breakouts, but I want to talk to you about how much money there is, what we've heard from providers specifically so far, and then we'll get your thoughts about what we've heard so far and how you think we can maybe fine-tune our efforts to grow trauma-informed care supports moving forward. Before we jump into that, I just want to take a break and ask if there are any questions or anything bubbling up for folks, any input that's coming over. And again, we will take time to talk through some of this going forward, but I just want to make sure I'm making sense. Of course, keep talking at you. So as I noted earlier, the Washington State Legislature passed the Fair Start for Kids Act in 2021 specifically. And so Section 304 of the Fair Start for Kids Act directs DCYF to grow these trauma-informed supports for early childhood professionals. So based on that legislation specifically, providers may receive financial awards for earning specialty credentials, such as, for example, a degree in early childhood mental health. And providers may also receive financial awards for participating in trauma-informed professional development and training. So we'll be asking you at the tail end of today's discussion, what types of training should be recognized. And so we'll be talking about what types of degrees, for example, that could be recognized. So we have currently more than $2 million to award this fiscal year for trauma-informed financial incentives. And that money specifically is designated to be distributed to individual providers and business owners per the Fair Start for Kids Act. That's the language there. It also talks about owners who receive training and education in trauma-informed care. We're also investing, DCYF specifically is also investing in new trauma-informed and healing-centered training, and we're growing developmental screening offerings too. So lots of different things happening through the Fair Start for Kids Act, just with regard to trauma-informed care. So again, I'm just really excited about this opportunity to grow our supports, to cultivate a shared language, et cetera. And so with that, let's talk about who's eligible for those supports. That's another important theme, right? So who is eligible for these awards, these financial awards specifically? So the Fair Start for Kids Act is fairly specific in who is eligible for the awards. And those supports, specifically the awards, are to be released for licensed and certified providers, for ECAP providers, early ECAP providers, early achievers coaches, birth to 3 quality initiatives coaches, and license exempt providers who are accepting state subsidy. So these supports for providers at least are for providers who are receiving state subsidies. So just to make that clear specifically. Any questions about the eligible providers, since that's kind of an important point before we move on and talk a little bit about how we're working to get co-design processes to help shape these supports?
Are infant and early childhood mental health consultants eligible for this?
IEC MHCs, no, they're not actually, but that's a great question. Thank you, Nietzsche. Any other questions about this? Okay. So let's move on and talk about the processes by which we're designing some of these supports, and then we'll go into our breakouts and hear from you about what could be helpful specifically. So some of you have likely heard DCYF staff talk about our increasing use of the Liberatory design framework, which I actually really love for a variety of reasons. Liberatory design is super cool because fundamentally it's a project design process, right? So it spells out ways by which we can design projects such as this and make sure that we are working to interrupt inequity and we are shifting power to those most impacted by practice changes, policy changes, et cetera, right? So a cool thing that I really appreciate about liberatory design is that it also aligns very firmly with trauma-informed approaches, right? So I showed you those key principles specifically. And a couple of those principles that we highlighted of the 6 that I showed you on the screen, specifically collaboration and mutuality and empowerment, voice and choice. Those 2 principles talk about making sure that the people affected by policy change, practice change, et cetera, are have a very prominent voice in those decisions. And so DCYF's embrace of the liberatory design model very much aligns with trauma-informed principles and practices. So I am really excited about engaging in liberatory design for that, among other reasons, and that it just really feels like the right thing to do to make sure that we have the, we're inviting the right people to DCYF table, we're going to the right table to get input about this and do co-design, like true co-design efforts, right? So one thing I really like to highlight when I'm talking about liberatory design and also trauma-informed care is this work is not hierarchical. It's not supposed to be about DCYF telling others what to do. It's about us hearing from folks what is helpful. So that's something we're really striving to do in a meaningful way. And I'll talk a little bit more about what we've done so far here in a minute and what our plans are to go forward in terms of engaging in co-design processes around trauma-informed supports. So let's quickly just talk about what we're up to with regard to co-design processes, and then we will go into breakouts here in just a couple of minutes and hear from you what could be helpful. So this image here, right, on our screen specifically is DCYF's application of liberatory design to our work growing trauma-informed and healing-centered supports specifically. And so the top arrow says, notes that families will be invited to co-create trauma-informed professional development practices. So we're asking for help. We will be asking for help with co-design from the DCYF Parent Advisory Group, also from foster families, foster youth specifically. And when we go into our breakouts, we'll ask for your advice on who else we should be talking to, what other people we should be inviting into these co-design processes specifically, right? And then we're also consulting with, we had a design group of providers in June. We brought together some providers and we asked them how best to start designing these supports. And I'll talk to you about what we learned from them here in a minute and how that's shaping our work so far. We also, we're meeting with the provider support subcommittee next week too. And I met with them in April as well. So, and then I'm visiting with TPAC tomorrow. I met with IPEL. It's like the Trauma-Informed Care Roadshow right now. And that I'm speaking to as many people as possible about this work and really excited to hear feedback. And again, I'll share with you here in a moment what the June provider design session looked like too. So we're also consulting with DCYF staff and subject matter experts who are in various advocacy groups at the University of Washington, et cetera, bringing very smart people to the table, bringing folks to the table who are working hands-on in this world to help shape the supports that we are growing to help cultivate trauma-informed approaches across systems, really. So this goes even beyond just early childhood, and I'll talk to you more about that here in a minute. So I see a couple of chats coming in. Any questions? I'm going to just pause for a second before. Okay, so I see a question from McKinley. Yes, McKinley, that's a great question. And yeah, so McKinley is asking, will caregivers and potentially youth who contribute to the co-design efforts be compensated for their time? Yes, absolutely. They're subject matter experts in their own right, and they should be compensated. And with our June provider design session, we did pay folks for their time in that. Any other questions specifically with regard to anything I've covered so far, or whatever else might be percolating up for you? Okay. So yeah, so let's move on to the next slide specifically. And so in June, I mentioned this provider design session, and those providers did receive compensation for their time. We asked them specifically what types of payment structures should be offered for individual providers who achieve new levels of knowledge, skills, abilities, etc. And they indicated that they wanted a tiered payment structure. And I'll show you an image specifically of what that looks like here in a minute, so you have a better, I know sometimes it's easier for me to look at things, so we'll show you an image of what they decided on here in a moment. And actually the slide that we're looking at is comprised of feedback that we got from those providers within the design sessions in June. And you can see that they talked about, for example, mandatory reporting being a need for more training on mandatory reporting. We heard about the importance of engaging in mutuality, which I appreciated so much from a trauma-informed perspective. That's a huge theme, is how do we really engage in mutuality and collaboration with the folks we're serving? How do we specifically meet people where they're at? So you see different people down there in yellow on the right side. So that word cloud, again, just is comprised of the feedback we heard from folks. So again, they stated the way they would like the financial compensation to be distributed, and we're going to ask you about that here in a couple of minutes too, just to get your take on what they how they shaped the co-design process so far. But just to reiterate that we have we'll be continuing to adjust our processes for releasing these funds throughout the year, and really just listening to hear what's needed. So we also heard from them specifically about the need to hear more about recognizing red flags for trauma, strategies for establishing trust. That's a huge deal, especially when we're working with populations from marginalized communities, et cetera. Building trust can be really hard. So we're working to think through how we provide additional supports for providers to teach folks about how to build trust. And I'll talk more about how we're doing that here in a minute too. And specifically, actually, the input that we heard from providers is, sorry about this slide, thanks up, I see you going back and forth. The input that we heard from providers specifically is being incorporated into a new training that we're creating, which will be made available to all early childhood providers. So we're creating a trauma-informed and healing-centered fundamentals training, which covers some of the stuff we've talked about already today, the 4 R's, the key principles, why those principles are important, and also some other key themes within the trauma-informed world, like what are adverse childhood experiences and things like that. So we are currently working to create that training right now. And again, feedback we heard in June from providers is helping to shape that training specifically. So I'm excited to be working for that. I do believe we'll release that training in early in fiscal year 24 specifically. So sometime around next June or so, we'll be releasing that training, and I'm shooting for that. We also attended IPEL too. I just want to give you a heads up that when I attended IPEL, we heard that DCYF staff needs trauma-informed training, which I appreciate, and we are making this training available to all DCYF staff and contractors too. So just reiterating that we're listening, and I think that's a great, really important thing that we provide the training also to DCYF staff and contractors. So we're leveraging those Fair Start for Kids Act supports more broadly to also grow trauma-informed knowledge, skills, and abilities within our DCYF staff. So with that, let's look about the financial framework. The next slide, thank you, that we heard from providers in June would be preferable. So what we're looking at here specifically is what we heard again. We heard that there could be 2 different tiers of financial awards for providers based on the training that folks received. So for example, here in this first category, we have the new 4-hour trauma-informed and healing-centered fundamentals training, which we will not provide financial incentives for. We envision that as being kind of just a foundational course that all of us should have, right? Including DCYF staff and contractors. And then with the second tier specifically, the design group and also a technical advisory group that DCYF has been working with has identified specifically these 4 trainings to be eligible for $800 financial awards. And the reason those trainings have been identified is because of their trauma-informed care content. I have actually reviewed all of these trainings and identified key principles and concepts within them and verified that they are trauma-informed. We'll talk more about what that looks like in terms of recognizing trainings going forward, because it's kind of a hard thing. It's subjective to a certain extent, right? So we'll talk more about how we're moving to a more objective mechanism by which we can recognize trainings here in just a second. And then so the third tier, the most intensive tier of trainings, these are typically, upwards of 20 hours worth of investment for providers. And that's why it's been deemed an intensive training and warranting a larger financial award. So what we're looking at there is Cultivate Learning put out a roughly 25-hour trauma-informed care course, which I took and is really rich. And so that is eligible for a $1,200 award when people complete that. And then Prepare for Care, which is a really outstanding training from the Imagine Institute. Folks who take 24 hours or 4 segments of Prepare for Care will be eligible also for $1,200. And then pyramid model implementation sites too. Those individuals who work at pyramid model implementation sites will be eligible for the larger or more intensive award than that provided in tier 2 for pyramid model training, which is just specifically taking the training. So, and then Colleen, I'm glad you asked that question. I was thinking I should answer it, so I'm glad you reminded me specifically. So the trainings listed are specific trainings offered, and anyone can take any combination they want. I will tell you that the payments are capped at $1,200. So for example, if I were to take conscious discipline and receive an $800 award and then continue on to take Prepare for Care, you would only get $400 additional for the Prepare for Care content. Does that answer your question, Colleen?
Yes, partially. And then like conscious discipline specifically, we utilize that in my program, and there are 2 different 10-hour long trainings, as well as a combination of like they have 2 or 3 different 3 hours. So I was curious if staff did a combination of different ones, so 2 or 3 of the 3-hour ones and got to 10 hours, would they still get the 800? Or is it just the specifically named 10-hour conscious discipline training that they would get that for?
It can be multiple iterations as long as it totals 10 hours. And oftentimes the conscious discipline training, it comes in like 1-hour units, but as long as it totals 10 hours of content, then it will qualify for the $800 award.
Okay. And how do you verify participation in it? Because the conscious discipline ones are web-based, offered online. Mm-hmm. Are these trainings that will have to be done then by a STARS certified trainer? Is there any way that people can go back retroactively? Like I have staff who have completed all of these conscious discipline trainings already. Mm-hmm. We were part of a pilot project 3 or 4 years back here in Spokane. And so I'm just curious how far back this will go. And then also being mindful, like staff repeating a course just to get the $800 that wasn't available before, is that the best use of their time, or would there be other ways to go?
Great questions. Those are great questions. And those are all questions I've been working through for the last several months with our stakeholder groups. And so, yes, it is retroactive specifically, and we are working, and yes, it has to be STARS trainers. And also these have to have learning application support, specifically, whether it be a community of practice or coaching I am working currently with the conscious discipline training contractors specifically, who will be making the awards, and they will go back retroactively to look at their records. And then it's a bit of a frankly cumbersome process for us to go back and look, but we are working through those processes right now. So the awards should go out through the training providers, and we will have to record it into merit too. Yeah, so hopefully we have good record keeping either on Merit's side, or the individuals have their certificate, or the contractor specifically has a record, because we will be doing verification of those processes through our Merit navigators. And so hopefully your folks will receive contact from the conscious discipline trainers, and then the award mechanisms will kick in that way. We're hopeful that these payments will be distributed by the end of the calendar year, but again, there's some contract negotiations, et cetera. It's a lot of moving pieces. But does my rambling response help, Colleen?
Yes, I am a rambler myself, so that did everything. Thank you.
I think okay, good. Happy to try to answer questions about this stuff. Getting money out the door in a new framework is a little challenging, but we're getting there, and it's really exciting too, because it's incentivizing trauma-informed care. Anything else bubbling up for folks in terms of questions around the money? I should note too, so thus far, we've recognized as an educational, like a college credential, specifically individuals who have an infant early childhood mental health credential. And so that'll apply to coaches specifically, and also early childhood care providers. And then Nucha, I'm remembering your question too. I think I'm fairly solid on that. IECs, MHCs will not receive compensation, but I'm going to double check on that for you too. And if I learn something else, I'll follow up with you, because it seems a little counterintuitive there.
No, thanks for that. I think the only other question that I have is this connected in some ways to the infant mental health endorsement process through the Washington Association of Infant Mental Health?
Yeah, you folks are asking all the questions that I should be covering, so that's great. So moving forward, yes, we have heard from providers, and even, the legislative language too talks about infant early childhood mental health very specifically. And so going forward, we are envisioning the addition of endorsements through WAAIM, the Washington Association of Infant Mental Health, and also specifically the Barnard Center, some offerings through there. And we're also doing a survey currently of college courses offered as standalone options that provide trauma-informed care specifically. So North Seattle College, as some of you may be aware, they have a one standalone offering on trauma-informed care for early childhood professionals. And so we will be incorporating into that into our financial award framework going forward within the next phase or two of these award processes. So I'll show you what the timing looks like here in a minute, but those are great questions.
Can I do a quick plug? Green River College has a Bachelor's of Applied Science program in infant mental health that actually works with low-income students to try to provide that education for free. So, and it's all, I believe it's all online at this point. So if you know of people who are interested, check them out.
Okay, that's a great plug. I appreciate it. And those individuals who are working in the early childhood, who are eligible per the Fair Start for Kids Act would be eligible if they received a bachelor's in that too, for that $1,200 award. So, it's cool stuff, right? So we're incentivizing this. Any additional questions or thoughts coming up for folks? And just to highlight too, so we do have, a finite amount of money for incentives. As I noted, we have about $2 million this fiscal year. So just kind of keep in mind that eventually we could run out of money. We're not there yet, but just keep that in mind. So, okay. So let's talk about the timeline, and then I want to make sure we have time for breakouts too. So this is the timeline. And this timeline, again, we have multiple pieces in play, but this is what we're looking at basically in terms of when we anticipate releasing financial awards to folks. So we're looking at a phase one right around now for those bachelor's degree in infant early childhood mental health. training paths we're looking at. We've recognized this first phase, which is the graph I just showed you, the image I just showed you. And then during our phase 2, we're hoping to get those training compensation awards out by the end of this calendar year, as I noted. And then, you know, I mentioned that it's really challenging at this point to identify trainings that are trauma informed and to determine who is trauma informed. You know, the legislature has told us to, you know, recognize people for growing trauma informed knowledge, skills, and abilities, but we don't have any real objective means to do that right now. And so that's something we'll be working on going forward, is how do we create objective standards to determine to what extent people are trauma informed? And is there a way we can create those kind of standards to recognize people with financial awards going forward? And so we will be convening some stakeholder groups in the coming months to talk about what those standards could look like to determine if people are trauma informed. You know, are you at eye level with kids? Are you making sure that we're creating, you know, an environment, a warm environment with families that they don't deem as threatening? Are we working with our own self-reflection processes in terms of furthering equity for kids of all different demographics, right? And so that's a process that we'll be engaging in here in the coming months. And when we go into breakouts, I'd love to hear more from you about how we can have meaningful engagement with people around creating those professional standards and really determining what does it look like to be trauma informed, because there's still a lot of confusion even among people in academia, right? Like there's not a lot of stuff out there in academia about trauma informed care, even it's hard to find. So that's what we're looking at. Any additional questions or input from folks before we go into our breakouts? Because I have a tendency to take up a lot of time and we need to do that. Okay, so we can go to the next slide. And what I'm envisioning, I'm not sure how many people are here. I was envisioning, and Aaron and folks who are running the slides, et cetera, I was envisioning breakouts of maybe 5 or 6 people. And I'm happy to staff one of those breakouts, or if you want to designate individuals within those breakout rooms to take notes. I also have some links to Google Docs that we can share with folks in the respective breakout rooms so people can take notes and then report out. What I'd love to do is take maybe 10 minutes to go into breakouts and hear from you about some of these questions so you can help us co-design these processes and these strategies for supporting the workforce as we try to mitigate the impacts of trauma on the people we walk alongside. So these are the questions. Are we good to go into breakouts, folks?
I think we're good. Jessica Spencer is going to be doing the tech for that. And I just wanted to check in. Jess, did you want to be assigned to a room?
Yeah, I could do that. I want to make sure that we have access. I can share for everybody. These are, I have 6 different links, I think, to different Google Docs. I want to make sure we're efficient in the way we share those links. But yeah, I'm happy to be designated one into a breakout or to pop in and out, whatever is deemed most helpful.
Okay, for the links, I know that once we go into breakouts, they're not going to be able to access anything in the chat.
Right. So let me add these.
I'm sorry?
I'm adding the links, but
so either people should grab those links before you go into the breakout room, or Jessica, can you refresh my memory if there's an easy way for us to like share out that information in breakout rooms?
So I made a Jamboard, but yeah.
Oh, we can do that.
Oh,
whatever's easiest.
Is it, Jessica, were you thinking putting those links in the Jamboard? Or I'm not sure what the easiest way to do that is. Oh, so, okay, so let's see. I'm definitely not the expert on those intricacies of Jamboard once you're in it.
Nor am I.
But I would suggest, Jess, if you want to maybe throw the links in the chat, and then we can just instruct people to grab it.
Yeah, and if you get the wrong, like if you're in room 5 and you get the link for room 3, I don't think that's gonna hurt anything. We just want to hear from you. So as long as we get that chronicled, your input chronicled will be good.
Oh, okay, so we can just have them put their notes in the Jamboard. We don't need to do the Google Docs, is that what you're saying? Or-
Yeah, I mean, whatever works. Like, I just want to make
Okay.
this efficient and also maximize our use, so our time together. So if it's most efficient to use that Jamboard, let's do it.
Okay, great. I think I might have been confused. I thought there was maybe something in the Google Docs that they needed, but if it's just to capture their input, then yeah, everybody just can use the Jamboard. And then Jessica will be sending everybody into breakout rooms shortly.
Yeah, and just a reminder, please do take notes, designate a note taker, and then we'll be asking you to report out too. So just a heads up about that. Maybe a little bit of public speaking involved. We'd love to have you.
Thank you. Yeah, I would love to be there for that conversation, but we'll see.
I think we could really benefit from you being there. As I noted in the invitation as well, though, there will be. Are we all back? Jessica, how many groups did we have? So I know how many groups to call upon.
I believe there were 3 groups of 5 or 6.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. And everyone's back? Yeah. Yep. Cool. I would love to hear from you what you talked about in terms of your responses to these questions or anything else that came up for folks in these conversations. Any volunteers to report out? Anyone chomping?
Well, I can start. We only got to one question,
Okay.
or the first one.
Okay.
And there was some unclearness. So we had some questions about the tier system. Is the tiered system built on each other? Is it about cumulative hours, or is the training, or is it training specific? So, for example, conscious discipline for tier 2. Or is it, you do training and training and training, you get up to a certain number of hours, you're eligible for tier 2. You
Okay.
keep doing trainings and you're eligible for tier 3.
Okay, great question. Do you want me to answer that first?
You can. I just have
Okay,
another.
go ahead,
Yeah,
please.
Go ahead. Okay, so the other thing that was talked about was the tier 1 where there's no compensation. If that training isn't mandatory, the thought is that maybe some kind of incentive would be good to help encourage people to take it. Aside from the folks that are motivated to do it in anyways,
Okay.
but that if it's not mandatory, it may be helpful to have some kind of incentive for it.
Okay, that's good.
Anything to add, my group?
Awesome. Okay, that's helpful, Nietzsche. Which group were you in? 1, 2, 3? And sorry if you don't know.
I don't know the number.
That's okay. It's not super important. And so with regard to your questions about the tiered structure, so it's not about cumulative hours. It's more about the trainings specifically. Now, hours are part of that, in that, for example, Prepare for Care, we're requiring at least 24 hours to prepare to receive the financial award. So the trainings that you're looking at are very specific to those individual trainings. And the reason for that is because they have very specific trauma-informed content that we've gone in there and said, okay, this actually does embody trauma-informed, anti-bias, anti-racist approaches. So the trainings are very specific. And the reason they're designated in that kind of tiered structure is just to illustrate that you can take Prepare for Care at the most intensive, or you can do a less intensive, or you could do both. And so again, just going back to conscious discipline, for example, which is in the intermediate category for 10 hours. If one individual went through 10 hours of conscious discipline, they could be eligible for the $800. And then from there, if they were to go on to do go on to do specifically the, the TIC for cultivate or something, they would get that $400 extra. But it would still be another additional 25 hours for the cultivate training. Does that help? I feel like that might not have been super clear.
So then, hi, Jess.
Hi.
Hi. So I think it would be good to add "or" after each training
Okay.
to make sure that that's very clear.
Yeah.
And then one of the other, I think we had just within the bands, just making sure that folk know that they don't have to do tier 1. They can automatically, if they choose to, jump to tier 3 or 2.
Okay.
Depending upon what their interest is.
Okay.
We were assuming that that was correct.
Okay.
And were we right?
So we're still talking about incorporating the trauma-informed care fundamentals within childcare basics. And so there's still conversations around that specifically. And so it could be that that's just a foundational thing that everybody's going to receive. So childcare basics, all providers receive that. We could be wrapping that TIC 101 into childcare basics. And so I'd love to hear from you though, if you think that's appropriate or not.
Well, I think if you do decide to do that for providers and add it into basics, that's fine. But then you have to think about there should be some incentive, as was shared, around staff that have been doing the work and supporting the field before this was a decision. So just making sure that you find a way to even incentivize that, because if, and the other dangerous, the part is too, if you move it into basics, then it moves from being optional to mandatory.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
I see Colleen too, and then I think Nancy.
Okay. Colleen, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to share that I assumed, by the way, that this was laid out and how things have happened in the past, that this at some point in time may become mandatory for staff. I'm not opposed to the concept of trauma-informed being something that is in the education, but I do just want to call out the burden that's being placed on childcare provider staff. So if you're going to add this to childcare basics, what are you going to take out of childcare basics? Okay. How are you going to incentivize people? Childcare basics is extremely expensive. It's hard to access and staff struggle to get that completed in their first 90 days. So adding anything to childcare basics without addressing the underlying issues that already exist with childcare basics is troublesome for me. And I think that while I love trauma-informed care, I have dedicated a lot of time and effort to that. So it is not at all a opposition to the concept, as much as just realizing what that means for onboarding new staff and what would happen there. So we definitely need to take a look at that. And I think that there should definitely be some very targeted community engagement if there are going to be decisions made about what's included in childcare basics. As far as I'm concerned, or as far as I'm aware, not concerned, there wasn't that process, that co-design to childcare basics back when it was put into the WAC in 2019. And that may be something that we need to go back and revisit, especially if there's conversations about adding to childcare basics. So yeah, and I think that then there needs to be an incentive on that part. That's already a lot of work. And since I'm already talking, I'll just say the other part that we said in our group too was that if this doesn't become part of childcare basics, it should otherwise be considered towards equivalencies for meeting our education requirements already spelled out in the WAC. So trauma-informed trainings are higher level, more intensive trainings, generally speaking. And I think that we should be assigning credits or whatever it is in that equivalencies pathway or community pathway, whatever it's being called right now, towards those education requirements, because 2026 is coming up really fast. If you're talking about onboarding new staff, taking a 30-hour basic stars, it takes far more than 30 hours for a lot of people, on top of all of the other, annual, yearly requirements and stuff like that. We are just really stacking things up for new staff coming into the field, when we all know this is an urgent time to be incentivizing folks to come to the field. While I love that there's a financial incentive to this kind of one-time thing, you're not talking about anything that's sustainable for our workers who are working for at or near minimum wage. And adding and adding and adding and adding to the requirements for them to just do their jobs. So I had to, share that sentiment in general with it. While I'm not opposed to, a trauma-informed approach and including that, it's a lot to ask for new providers or new staff.
Okay, yeah, I totally hear that. And I took a bunch of notes, and I know this is being recorded as well. I really appreciate your input, Colleen, and just to note that you're receiving support in the chat as well. So you're not alone in your perspectives. Other groups want to report out? I'd love to hear. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is Nancy. I wanted to say this piece too, and maybe you're already doing this. I'm not as much in the know as I used to be, but as you are working through this too, working with the Early Childhood Teacher Preparation Council at the community college and higher ed institutions, I think is really important, because there are students that do not have to do childcare basics, but would not have had trauma-informed care practices in those courses.
Right.
And also I know that the council is also talking with North Seattle about the certificate they've put together that may become statewide, where people who already have like maybe a short certificate would just need to add one course to get a trauma certificate. So there's lots of things going on there. So I don't know how connected you are yet with that group, or if you want to get more connected, I think that would be a good idea.
Yeah, no, I love that input, Nancy. Thank you so much. And we have been communicating specifically with North Seattle and the folks who put together that specific course, and certainly people within the higher ed world, having conversations with them about how to make sure we're aligned and we're not duplicating efforts or missing or whatever. So that's a really important point. I appreciate that you brought it up.
Okay.
Other folks, I know I'm running over time, but I want to make sure we have time for your input. Some other things that came up in those breakouts, and I will be referencing that jam board too, but I'd love to hear anything else that you'd like to talk through before. This is important stuff, and again, it's really exciting and we want to do it right. We want to have meaningful conversations with you, and that means, closing the feedback loop and having, real dialogue. So just thank you so much for engaging with us in that. Still open to some other thoughts, though. That doesn't mean I'm leaving.
Jess, I was wondering if you're working with right response, because that's a big one that my child care center does annually.
Okay.
We have all our staff certified in right response, and it is somewhat trauma informed. So that would be another entity.
Okay.
And I think you need to look at to see where they align, because there could be other childcare centers that do that.
Okay, cool. That's
we have
helpful.
invested a lot of time and money into it.
Okay, I appreciate that. I haven't reviewed it myself, but I'll look for it. I'll take a look at it.
Yeah. And then for me, because I jumped in halfway through your presentation, I was unsure whether this training reimbursement process is the same. It will go through the same one as the merit training reimbursement process. That's very clunky, that requires an application, and it takes about 3 months to see a check.
It's different, actually. Hopefully for better. It is a little clunky still, to be really frank about it, though. We will be releasing the financial awards for training specifically through our training contractors, and that's because of the challenges getting it out with merit right now. And so that's the plan, and we are having conversations with all of the training contractors who provide those specific trainings that we itemized. And so that's the way it's going to be going out, is through the training contractors, and retroactively too. As long as those trainings had learning application supports, including a community of practice or coaching, and typically those trainings that we've identified do have those supports, because we know that, it's beyond just having seats and chairs for training to really absorb the stuff. So we want to make sure there's a little bit more to it. And then we will be releasing communications about this stuff hopefully soon. We're just working through those negotiations with the trainers before we go public, like release it to the world. And so that's among the reasons why it hasn't been released broadly yet, is we're still solidifying those contractual agreements with the training contractors. That was another long-winded answer, but hopefully it helps. Okay. Any other thoughts from folks? Again, I'm conscious of going over time, but I want to make sure we have time for you.
think the only one thing I'd add, and I think it's kind of piggybacking off of, I believe it what Nietzsche was talking about in terms of incentivization a little bit. Just looking at that tier 1, and right now there's no compensation for somebody going through tier 1. And so one thing that we talked about in our group is, that's feels like that's creating a barrier for providers when there's just no compensation, especially given that they are the time that it takes to go through those foundational trainings. And so might there be some reconsideration in providing a certain level of compensation at that tier 1 level.
I appreciate that input. And I'm making a big note with an asterisk next to it, Enrica. So thank you for the input. I appreciate it. Anything else bubbling up for folks? Thoughts, questions? Okay. Well, we're always happy to talk with you through these questions. And if there's anything I can do to be helpful, my email is up there on the screen. And I love to talk about trauma-informed care just in general. So if you want to chat, I'm happy to do that. And with that, I think we can end this segment. Again, reach out if anything comes up for folks. I'm always happy to chat.
Great. Thank you so much, Jess. This is, trauma-informed care is just so important. Really, we really appreciate you taking the time to come to ELAC to hold this conversation. Thank you. Next is lunch for everyone to take a break. So it's 11:55 right now, and the meeting will resume at 12:45. So we want everyone to go and take a break, have lunch, take a walk, come back, and we've got a lot planned for the afternoon. So.
Want to thank all right, thank you very much. I want to thank Enrica for handling the first half of the day. I know the executive leadership team knows, but just for the public, I had the privilege, along with some other providers, to be presenting at the Elevate conference today. A little bit about our experience during COVID. So hopefully those who are able to participate were able to leave with some good information about how they can support providers as we continue to do our work. But for the sake of time, I know Vicki usually has quite a bit to share with us. So I want to turn this over to our FSKA evaluation and data update piece. That's Fair Starts for Kids Act. For those who may not know that acronym, I want to turn this over to Vicki Ibarra, and I'm assuming that's Adasa. And Adasa, I do not want to, is it Budrovich, Ryan? And please excuse me if I just butchered your last name. I should have asked you for assistance in the chat, so forgive me. But please feel free to correct, and I will turn the agenda over to you.
Thanks so much, Lois. It's great to be with you all this afternoon. And it looks like a full group. That's great. As Lois said, my name is Vicki Ibarra. I am Director of the Office of Innovation, Alignment, and Accountability with DCYF, and have been visiting this group every meeting, I think, since the Fair Start for Kids Act was enacted, and hope to be invited back at each opportunity, at least through the end of 2023, when we have a big report due. So it's been really helpful for us to be able to come and share with you the work we're doing in building data and evaluation capacity for the Fair Start for Kids Act, and to get feedback from you as to what seems to be helpful and what might not be as helpful. So thanks for that opportunity. As Lois said, I'm here today with my colleague, Adasa Budredvik-Ryan, who is our newly started Fair Start for Kids Act evaluator. And I'm also here with a colleague from Washington STEM, Min Wangbo, and I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves briefly. Adasa?
Thanks, Vicky. Hi, everyone. It's good to be here. So my name is Adasa Budravich Ryan, and I am the Fair Start for Kids Act evaluator. I've actually been with DCYF for 3 years. Primarily before that, I was working on the preschool development grant, so sort of just in a different early learning evaluation space. So I'm really excited to learn more about different early learning evaluations in Washington.
Thanks, Adasa. Min?
Thanks, Adasa and Vicky. Hi, my name is Min Huang Bo, and good to be here. I'm the Impact Director from Washington STEM, supporting DCYF on Fair Start for Kids Act data dashboard and data iterations uptake across this team. I've been in this meeting, I think almost every single meeting, as Vicky shared as well, and it's been an honor for Washington STEM to actually involve in these like code designing process and reflecting on what are the data needs, as well as the comments and feedback from all members in ELAC. So thank you so much for the opportunity for us to be here.
Thanks, Min. So with that, what I have for you today, and you'll also receive these slides in follow-up, so you'll have them as reference if interested. What I'd like to do today is 2 things. First of all, we want to share with you the approach that we're thinking of taking with the Fair Start for Kids Act September 2023 report. That's the report that the department is responsible for. So I have an initial draft logic model for you that lays out the approach we're thinking of taking, and we'd just love to get your feedback on that. And then Min is going to share and hopefully get feedback from you on an updated version of the childcare need and supply dashboard. This is a regional mapped dashboard that we've had up for a couple of years. We haven't updated it for at least 6 months because we knew new data was coming and a new design was coming. So that new design, that updated version, is what Min will share with you today. And I think it's helpful as we go through this to understand that in OIAA, we recognize that there's a bit of a difference between data and evaluation. They certainly are related and they interplay with one another. Data, we produce a lot of descriptive data that shows counts of things and where things are and what's happening across the state or over time. And descriptive data we have a lot of, and try to find new and interesting ways to display it in a way that's useful for communities to try to meet their own needs. And that's why we put so much of our data out on dashboards so communities have access to it. At the same time, evaluation is often answering deeper questions about how and why. Often inside the agency, when we present descriptive data, the first thing we get are questions about how and why. Well, how did that change happen? Or why did that change happen? Or what can we do to move those numbers? And those are deeper questions requiring deeper analysis, usually using the descriptive data as a source and then using evaluation and research techniques to get us to the how and why questions. So that's sort of how we think of the interplay between descriptive data and evaluation. For Fair Start for Kids Act, we're trying to do both and recognize that they're dependent on one another. Erin, it looks like we have 2 screens being shared. Do we need, I'm sorry, do I need to stop sharing?
It looks fine now.
I'm seeing that.
Oh, it looks fine now. There was a screen shared by Jessica and Vicky at the same time.
Okay, we're good now though. Okay.
Thanks for that, Nucha.
Although Vicky, I think you're not in the slideshow, but it doesn't matter. I can still read it.
Yeah, I keep it in this mode. I hope that's not too distracting so that I can write on the slides. If I get feedback, I'll write on the slides. Thanks. Okay, so just by way of reminder, our statutory requirement for the Fair Start for Kids Act evaluation comes out of 5237 and is tied to the 4 objectives of the legislation. Basically, what we are told is to evaluate the implementation of FSKA according to the 4 objectives of the legislation. At a high level, the evaluation is intended to answer the extent to which these objectives are being met. And our first of what will be biannual reports to the governor and legislature are due September 15th, 2023. So this is just a reminder of what those 4 overarching objectives of the legislation are: to advance racial equity and strengthen families by recognizing and responding to the growing diversity of our state's population, promote access to affordable, high-quality childcare and early learning opportunities for all families, paying particular attention to the needs of rural and other underserved communities, promoting kindergarten readiness by enhancing child development, including development of social and emotional skills, which we know are particularly important with COVID and the aftermath of COVID. That resilience for children is particularly important. Supporting working parents, as well as stabilizing and supporting childcare and early learning workforce. So those are the 4 objectives of the legislation, and really our organizing force for the evaluation. We will organize the evaluation around those 4 objectives. So when we think about an approach to that evaluation, the first thing to do for any good evaluation is one of the first things to do is to logic model out how we think these objectives are being met. So here what you see in our draft logic model is laying out the objectives on the left side, the same objectives that I just read, shortened of course to fit on the slide. But then we want to think about what activities are being done that contribute to those objectives, what might be the outputs, the counts of descriptive information that we can count, things happening as a result of those activities that we can count, kids served, zip codes served, think about those kinds of things, widgets that we can count. And then outcome metrics. So how can we measure the extent to which these objectives have been met? So those are more related to the outcomes. And the difference between an output and an outcome, I think most of you know this, but outputs are short-term things we can measure, and outcomes are more related to the objectives, the intended impact of the overall program. So that's how this is organized. So when we add in the activities column here, trying to color code it, and this is going to get busy, which is one reason that I'm leaving it with you so you can look at it afterwards. But what we've tried to do is inventory the activities that we believe are happening as a result of Fair Start for Kids Act or funded by the Child Care Stabilization dollars that relate to these objectives. Now, sometimes activities can support more than one objective, like expanding ECAP. It makes up a small activity under the second objective there, but we know that expanding ECAP not only promotes access to affordable childcare and early learning, it also promotes kindergarten readiness. So we've listed it here just once, just to make it easier. This is already a busy slide with lots of words, but we understand that some of these activities may be involved in contributing to the success of more than one objective, and we can evaluate them that way. ECAP is probably the easiest one to call out, but there may be others, so feel free to point that out. The activities here we have related to racial equity include language access and equity grants. Promoting access, those activities include targeted childcare outreach in high-risk geographies, expanding ECAP and birth to 3 ECAP, increasing childcare subsidy rates and expanding eligibility. And then the promoting kindergarten readiness objectives, we think of things like delivering the mental health consultation, expanding ECLIPS, expanding home visiting, administering the complex needs fund. And then for the objective of stabilizing and supporting the childcare and early learning workforce, we think of activities like awarding the childcare stabilization grants, expanding provider supports and professional development, making licensing more affordable for childcare providers, funding infant and dual language enhancement rates, and providing trauma-informed care supports. So those are some of the activities we've inventoried here. Then we can line up the outputs associated with each of those activities, things we would count, descriptive data we can report. And then we can line up the outcome metrics, the way that we would measure the extent to which those objectives had been met. For instance, advancing racial equity. Would we see a reduction in disproportionality and disparity in access, experience, and outcomes related to services? For promoting access to affordable childcare and early learning, would we see an increase in enrollment in geographies that are high risk? Would we see a decrease in the amount of childcare supply-demand gaps in deserts, especially in marginalized communities? For promoting kindergarten access, kindergarten readiness, would we see an increase in kindergarten readiness scores, especially in marginalized communities and for at-risk groups? And then for stabilizing and supporting the childcare and early learning workforce, would we see reductions in childcare provider churn? Churn is the entering and exiting of the early learning system that we know is sort of always there. Has it been increased? Has it been decreased? What about local geography measures of churn? So those are some of the ways we might measure the outcomes there. All right, so that is a very quick overview of a logic model that is probably much more complex than that, but I wanted to give you a high-level overview of it and then take questions and get feedback. This is in draft form and will be for a while. So we're happy to take ideas where we might have missed something that should be on here or have something on here that doesn't seem to be related. I see the question from Colleen in the chat. Why are stabilization grants being listed here? Those were federal funds, not FSKA. That's correct, Colleen. They were federal funds, but we consider them a part of the package of the early learning interventions that are being evaluated here, and believe that the legislature intended that to be the case. So we're going to include those grants in the evaluation. Thanks for the question. I'd like to open it up for any other questions or feedback on this approach. Again, this report is not due until September of next year. We expect to be substantially done by the end of June of next year because of the need for a review process by us and by the governor's office. So we've got time to refine this. I think when we come next time, I'll probably ask Adasa to share a timeline so that you can see the opportunities to input, as well as any additional progress we've made on actually measuring some of these things. But for today, we'd just love to get any feedback that you might have on how we're thinking of approaching this and ideas you might have.
Vicki?
Deanne, can you say, I'm sorry, go ahead, Nucha.
Deanne can go first. I think you were. Deanne can go first.
Okay, sorry. I'm just asking what level of, when I think about access, we have such an access problem in infant toddler care as opposed to preschool. And so doing the number of working connections payment, childcare payments actually masks what may be a significant issue of comparing how many applications are approved versus how many were actually placed and paid out. So I'm wondering if there's the ability to break that down by type and seeing whether we're seeing increased payments being made on behalf of infants and toddlers, or conversely, whether the other question I think under there is the number of working connection applications that are approved versus actually using the subsidy. So I'll just raise those two things around access.
Thanks, Deanne. I appreciate you bringing that up. And absolutely, we can break those out by age groups. And we would certainly agree with you that infants and toddlers care is a particular area of concern. I'm going to depend on Adasa to be taking these feedbacks so that we can be sure to incorporate them. Thanks so much, Deanne, for sharing that. And Colleen, I see your suggestion that we add a note that the grants were federally funded so that no one assumes that the budgets were covered by the state FSKA budget. We can certainly do that. Thanks, Colleen. Nucha?
Yeah, the question that I have, you had referenced the complexity of this, and I'm wondering about the one of the major arguments around mental health consultants is the reduction in the disparities of children of color being expelled. And so I'm wondering how you made the decision to either place it in kindergarten readiness versus racial equity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we can certainly evaluate its impact on both. It is a hard intervention to get our hands around. And Adasa had some experience with this in the preschool development grant because some of the work in foundational work on mental health consultation was funded through the preschool development grant. The data is not great. So it's a tough one to evaluate, but I appreciate what you're saying, and I certainly would agree. We would hope it would reduce disparities too, so we can make sure to put it in both categories. Thanks, Nisha. Other suggestions? And this won't be your last chance. We'll be back, so you can give us these suggestions anywhere along the way. So you see the question from Soleil in the chat. Can you speak to the kind of data for infant mental health consultation?
I know that there's a division in DCYF that has been hiring mental health consultants, I think with like childcare aware. So that's who I would go to. I am not sure what exactly data they're collecting though. But I can connect you to the person at
Soleil, I think my comment about data not being great really spoke to the expulsion data. There is a requirement to report expulsion, but it's not at the child level. So we can describe it, we can take what's there and describe it, but it's hard to connect to anything else. We're happy to talk about that. It's actually Kevin Cummings in our office who has done that analysis. I'm sorry, Adasa, for putting you on the spot for that. It was Kevin who's done that analysis. Thanks, Deanne, for that clarification that mental health consultations focused on a classroom rather than a specific child. Thanks. Other clarifications or thoughts here?
I'll just add a comment that, you know, it sort of IECMHC is rooted in this belief that the caregiver is who has to change rather than the child. And so that's why it's very classroom focused. So just to add a little additional information. And we do have we're just starting year 3 of the IECMHC project, and we have built a fairly robust database. The question, we're just now getting our data chops where our employees are getting used to putting data in so that we can get good data out. So just to add that to the whole where we are in our developmental phases right now, I just think that would be helpful.
Thanks, Deanne. That is very helpful. I appreciate all the work you all do. We depend on you for a lot of data, and it's always very good. So thank you.
I think, thank you, Dan. And classroom level intervention sounds right. I think when it's about just measuring racial equity, though, I'm curious about how are we able or not able in all of these various programs to count who is, the children. Are fewer children of color being expelled? I think that's what Nucha was kind of getting at, if I'm not mistaken. So, and that's kind of a general question for all of these. Are we able to count child level data to understand equity and impact for children?
Thanks, Soleil, for the question. I would agree that's a really compelling thing we want to know. As I said, in the past review I've done of the expulsion data, it's not rich enough to draw those conclusions. But that said, I haven't looked at it in a long time, and I'm going to go back and ask my colleague Kevin Cummings to share with me his most recent analysis, and we can be sure to bring those back to this group in one of our future visits to make sure we're all on the same page about what we have and what we don't. What I do know is there is no data collection system, so there was no system stood up to submit those data. There's no online submission. It is, I think, spreadsheets and emails, and that means it's generally when we depend on spreadsheets and emails, the data are not as systematic as we'd like them to be. Thanks. For most of these, though, we do have child level data. We certainly have child level data on subsidy utilization, subsidy applications, ECAP utilization, those kinds of things. So for many of these that require child level data, we do have it. And we have lots of provider level data. I think we'll have most of the data that we need. When I look across DCYF, early learning is one of the areas where we have a lot more data than some of the other places. So if there are no other suggestions or comments on the logic model, again, not your last chance. You'll have this as a slide deck reference, and we can certainly take suggestions offline or at future meetings. So thank you for this initial discussion. I think what I'd like to do now is pivot to the updated, revised child care need and supply dashboard. And as Min pointed out earlier, this is one of the areas that we partner with Washington STEM on. This has been a substantial revision. Min, I'm going to stop sharing so that you can share. And we'd just love to get your feedback on the new design today. Go ahead, Min.
Thank you, Vicki, and thank you all for reviewing this dashboard with us today. So what I'm presenting today is the updated version of this demand supply dashboard that you have all seen in 2021 using the 2022 data update. So there are several features that's been updated on this version. So first, as you can see, the state median income filter is now available instead of the federal poverty level due to the fact that we have changed our guidelines and the parameters around who will be qualified for the Washington Connection full child care for subsidy grants. Second, on the age group, you'll see also a little bit of difference between the ones that we have produced in 2021 versus the version right now, that the infant group is now split from infant toddler. So you can actually see the different kind of age group like into 4 different range, like 1 infant, 2 in toddler, as well as preschool level age group and also school age. So this was another kind of like area of upgrade that we have made for changes that we have made for this version. And third, if you can see closely on this dashboard and you hover around, let's say Grand County, there are much more sort of detailed information that we had from the very first version. So first, there's information around the count of children who are served by the subsidy programs, as well as the count of children who are served by private pay. And this is, it says 0 in subsidy because yes, 85% over it, SMI income is not qualified for subsidy. So you will not see anything like more than 0 for this level, but the tooltip will have extra information that you probably need for your own kind of like information as well. Other than that, there's one slight change with the data iterations, especially with the map schema, the color scheme. we try to make sure that the current version actually addresses the ADA compliance so that people with vision deficiency can also read this information so that it can be legible for everyone who wants to use this information. So I'd love to get your feedback regarding this dashboard. You may want to take a minute or two to go through this information, and you can also popcorn your questions as well on the chat or through the unmuting yourself. Actually, I forgot to mention one last thing. There's a slight difference in calculating these number of children who are served in our state. And the great news is that we now have information about the FFN, the family homes, the family neighbors, and neighbors, like in that category that wasn't part of the calculation in the previous version. So that's been also added to the calculation of this dashboard as well.
And I just add a couple of things. The FFN estimates are only working connections paid FFN. They're not informal FFN. And for the first time, we include school age estimates. So in past, we've only gone up to preschool, but we now have school age. Thanks, Min, for your work on this. It really looks terrific.
Thank you. And
questions or feedback from Min?
I do have a personal message came from one of the members, and I will not say who it was, but like there's a little bit of like just a technical error on the age group that I need to resort it by infant, toddler, preschool, and school age. So that's one change so we're going to update for the next round of iteration.
I was actually going to, minor thing around that as well is to actually provide the age range for each of those categories, just so that everybody understands who we're talking about.
Got it. And one more thing for that one. Thank you, Nucha, for mentioning that, because toddler also includes toddler plus program enrolled children as well. So that's another thing that we have actually aggregated together into this group of age group. Any others?
And as with our
Go ahead.
I just note that as with all of our dashboards, you'll also find the updated entire data set on data.wa.gov, and at the bottom of the dashboard on the web page, once it's published, there'll be a link so that if you're interested in downloading the entire data set, it's redacted so that any cell sizes less than 10 are not in there. We don't publish any cell sizes less than 10, but you'll have access to the entire data set if you're interested.
There may be some wonderings around. I just wanted to make one more comment that there may be some wonderings about, like, is there a way to create a version that's only for ECAP or subsidy uptake? So there's another information regarding that we're currently working on, especially around like subsidy uptake dashboard, which will be the exact same look, but with the only filtered data from the ones who qualify or who are eligible for the subsidy programs in the state of Washington. So that will be also a part of this suite of the supply demand dashboard when we update on the website, and that's been still in progress from Washington STEM side to iterate that dashboard as well.
Thanks, Min, for mentioning that. That's been one of our most requested next products is a subsidy uptake. So I know folks are excited about that. We'll hope to have that soon, and we'll bring that back here as well.
And I do have a personal message that came through. Can you say more about over 85% state median income? Does this map include any children above that amount? And yes, like everyone, like who's actually 85% plus is the one that we have captured here.
Any other feedback, questions or feedback for Min on this dashboard? Great, well, thank you. If you do have Thanks, Min, for sharing that. And thanks to Washington STEM for all their support with these dashboards. Truly, it's been wonderful to work with them. If you do find that you have additional feedback or have questions, you're free to reach out to any of us. In addition, the general OIAA inbox will be listed at the bottom of all the dashboards. So if you find you get onto that page and start working with it or start doing something in detail with the data and have questions, you can always submit to that general inbox. It's monitored, not daily, but it is monitored. Or reach out to any of us. Okay. With that, I think I can give you back some time unless there are any remaining questions or feedback you have for us. Great. Well, wonderful to be with you all. Thanks so much for time on your agenda. Take care.
All right, thank you so much, Vicki and team. I'm looking now to see if I see Tracy and Delta here already.
Hi, this is Delta. I don't think Tracy is quite on yet. Oh, yep, just got a text from her. She's on her way. She's waiting for her dog to stop barking. So that's not the way she enters into this meeting. She'll be here in just a moment.
All right. Well, we're a little bit ahead of schedule. Why don't we come back during our next session time, which is from 1:30 to 2:15. So we'll give her a few minutes to get her puppy settled down. So why don't we take a break and come back at 1:30. Thank you. All right, so, sorry all, I was looking at my clock on my stove, which I just realized is a minute behind, but we will fix that at a later date. Welcome, Tracy, and welcome, Delta. We're looking forward to having you lead our discussion on the Early Learning Coordination Plan. For those who may not know, Tracy is the Preschool Development Grant Birth to 5 administrator, and Delta is the integration specialist, and they're going to provide an introduction to the publication to lay a foundation for a series of future deep dives in advancing integrated, equitable, and responsive early learning systems. So I want to thank you very much, Delta and Tracy, for being here. We are going to have a Jamboard activity, ELAC members and RAs and community members. So Tracy, I'm assuming you're starting out, so I'm going to turn it over to you.
I am. Thank you, Lois. And hello, everyone. Thanks for having us back. We are always so grateful for the continued partnering that we're doing. As Lois said, I'm Tracy. I'm the administrator for the Preschool Development Grant Birth Through 5, which is a terrible name for an amazing opportunity for federal funds to build our early learning system in a way that really lives into our values of equity and inclusion. Today I have with me Delta, as Lois said, and I also have with me Abby Berquist, and she is going to help manage the chat, there she is, and put some things in there for you because we are sharing with you today, hot off the presses, our Early Learning Coordination Plan publication. We're going to share that. We're going to share some updates and the status that is going on for the printing and the translation, the development of the website, things like that. And we're going to share how the designing of the coordination structure is going. And then we're going to hop to that Jamboard that Lois was talking about to get your feedback on all of that using some guiding questions. We got about 45 minutes, so let's get to it. If you go to the next slide, please. All right, so let's start by grounding ourselves in the liberatory design journey that we've all been on together. I see a lot of newer names, so just so you know, we have been working with ELAC and provider supports and IPEL from the very beginning back in 2019 on the designing Washington's first statewide early learning needs assessment, and then co-designing the early learning coordination plan. Now to the federal agency, HHS, this is what we are calling in our grant our strategic plan, but for Washington, it's so much more than just strategies. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And if you have any questions about the work of the Preschool Development Grant, we do have a webpage on the DCYF website. And also, we love talking about it because it's amazing. So just shoot us an email and we can set some time to give you all of the background details. Okay, so here is the liberatory design cycle. We've been using it all along, but what's super exciting is we are now in the ACT phase. We've done our imagining, our defining, our inquiring, our emphasizing. We are ready to try out our prototype and share it with you. So let's do it. Let's go to the next slide, please. It's here, y'all. So Abby's going to drop it in the chat for you to download. So it's kind of big. It has some beautiful pictures in it, so it takes a minute to download. So while you're working on that, we are here to celebrate. It has been 2.5 very long years working on this together to get what we are calling phase 1 of the release. It even takes a minute to get into the chat. So there it is. Okay, give it a click. So phase 1 started last week. Last week we met with our steering committee, introduced it to them. It is only an electronic version right now. So you can see that they're saving it. Hopefully that'll go out with your follow-up materials. And that's end of September, beginning of October. then, and so we've shared it with them, we're going to share it with you. We're sharing it with people who understand and who are already familiar with the concept of the early learning coordination plan, because it's not an action plan. It is not your typical, I would say, strategic plan. And it's not DCYF strategic plan. This is a statewide plan. So we don't want to get it out there into the world until there are the supporting toolkits and website for you to use with it. So hopefully you've downloaded it by now. We're going to get right to it. We're going to give you 10 minutes to thumb through it. And what a cool trick that we learned from the designers that we wanted to share with you. Abby put that into the chat as well. But when you open it, go to your toolbar and click on page view, and then click to page and move the little button over that says show cover separately. And what this will do will lay it out the way that it was designed, like a book. If you've got all of that ready, we are going to start this handy little timer. It's got some music and it's going to count down 10 minutes for you to spend some time with the ELCP. And then we're going to talk about next steps. So I will mute myself and let you do that.
Minutes is certainly not enough time to read the whole document. But we're really excited. We're really excited that it's here. We're excited that you get to look at it. And we look forward to hearing more about what you think about it here in a bit. So just a few updates. So first of all, printing, as you noticed, this was a digital version. We are coming up with hard copies. We are just waiting on a proof so we can say, yep, you got it right. And then it will take 15 to 22 days to print. And then we're going to have all of the hard copies here for distribution. So Abby, they will be putting a link in the chat box. There she goes. Thank you, Abby. If you would like a hard copy, please go click on that link and fill that out. We will keep all of your information private. It'll just be for the purposes of mailing these documents. And yeah, if you want one, we'd love to send you one. It will also give you an opportunity to tell us if you would like copies in Spanish or Somali. The document will be translated into both languages. And we'd like to have an idea of how many hard copies of those versions we should print. So while they're not available right now, there is a question in the survey about that. If we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. In other news, we are working on a microsite for the early learning coordination plan that is underway. The work for that is underway. We have contracted with Mitsui Creative, and you can see Glenn and Arlene pictured to the side there. They are the owners, and sorry, words are hard today. They are the owners and the folks who are building this website. Right now, we'll just have a temporary landing page that's in process. It will only have a few features. Its main purpose will be to download the versions of the early learning coordination plan. And we're just getting that up there because if you have looked on the very back page, you'll notice that there's a QR code and a website. And we want that website to exist when this starts going out. And building whole websites takes a lot of time, as you can imagine. And so a whole website won't be available in time, but a landing page should be. And then a full website will be available in December. They're also working with us on a logo and some branding. We have begun some initial logo work, mostly just concepts. And we don't expect a final logo until after the landing page is live. We're definitely prioritizing the landing page. As you can see on the bottom right of the screen in that very blurry picture, my apologies for that. On the landing page and when the full website is live, we will have English, Spanish, and Somali versions available to download on that front page. One thing that we noticed when we were looking at other websites is oftentimes non-English versions are kind of hard to find. They're buried under our resources tab. Folks have to navigate multiple layers of English language in order to get to the Spanish or the Somali versions. We didn't want that to be the case for this. And so that is one thing that we are working quite closely with Arlene on. is that all three versions will be on the front screen with their own language there, so that way folks can find them easily.
Right. Thank you. I have too many mute buttons. Okay. Well, thanks for that overview. So the steering committee has been working really hard to get this done. We have communications work groups on it, and then the whole group together will help, as they have been this whole time, on designing a logo and those final website pages. Very exciting to have a place where people can go to get all of the tools that are specific to this document. And so what we wanted to talk about now is what makes this different, right? Is this not just a strategic plan? And it is the word coordination. And since ELAC has been a part of this from the very beginning, you all know intimately that everything, starting with the needs assessment, has been centered in and really guided by communities. The state agencies, legislators, and other statewide partners are participants. We are participants, and we are invested. But the power of the process has largely been our communities. This visual provides a very high-level overview of that process and how it's been playing out. From content creation to design and implementation, the Early Learning Coordination Plan has been created to guide our early learning system towards the goals that matter most to our children, families, and providers. How do we know that? That's who created them. We talked a lot about that at the last meeting. Again, if you want more about the process, it is in that document in the very back in the appendix. It's that cool 2-page path spread. There are more details in the back of what we've been doing, but again, you can always reach out to talk with us. Next slide, please. So we, as the steering committee, have been digging deep and innovating to design how we are going to approach the implementation differently. Because what we know is that in Washington, we have many amazing examples of innovative work, but there's a missing piece that we think could change everything. Next slide. Coordination and collaboration, the middle part. Next slide. So imagine creating a way to coordinate the Early Learning Coordination Plan where all partners share a strong commitment to equity and creating an anti-racist culture, where there is collective commitment to co-designing with lived experts, where there is shared language for our work, where there is shared power and accountability, strategy, and decision-making processes, where partners collect, share, and use data together to inform our system, and where partners across the system meet frequently to share progress, make course corrections, and develop strategy. Next slide, please. So back in December, the Early Learning Coordination Plan Steering Committee formed a work group to create a set of recommendations on how we could approach the implementation of the ELCP. We knew we had to do things differently. We're going to get the same results if we keep putting out the same processes. So we have been trying really hard to design something different. And they took that information gathered from conversations with you all, many Jam boards, many surveys, the different Google Docs, meeting notes. They took it all and they came up with this recommendation to create an ELCP impact network. Now, an impact network is a framework that includes 3 parts nestled within each other. And here are the definitions for each of the pieces. The largest group, called the Movement Network, is a group of existing networks that have been invited and have agreed to share information and coordinate with each other on behalf of the ELCP, and to do that work in alignment with our core values. The work group is designing what the specifics are for what that looks like and what the commitment will be. But some examples of larger networks that I can imagine are like you all. You are a collection of networks. Washington Communities for Children, Child Care Aware of Washington, even local health jurisdictions and school districts are all networks who have the value of supporting children and families and providers. So inside of the Movement Network would be the core network, and that core network is our steering committee. The core network serves as the leadership function for the ELCP. Finally, there's the network coordination team. Currently, that's the role that Becoming Justice, the DCYF PDG team, and Cedar River Group are filling. Some of the things we do are host meetings, gather agenda topics, we're in charge of knowledge management, recruitment, onboarding, things like that to support the work of the core network. So that's the overview of the framework, but I was going to break it down for you so we can take a closer look at the 3 parts. Let's go to the next slide, please. All right, let's talk a little bit more about the movement network. The movement networks create change locally and are connected together to facilitate communication, to coordinate action, and to catalyze change on a broader scale. These are those organizations that are already doing that amazing, innovative work that we talked about earlier. Next one, next slide. The leadership function for the Impact Network is served by our core network or our steering committee. In general, the task is to catalyze action on a broader scale by guiding the movement network based on the early learning coordination plan. So some possible tasks we imagine are to champion and lead the anti-racism and inclusion work, to develop strategic priorities, represent the ELCP in public settings, things like that. The primary difference, though, from traditional power hierarchy is that the core teams do not hold formal authority over the other network members, right? So core teams make recommendations to advance the work of the shared purpose, and for us, that's the early learning coordination plan. But final decisions ultimately rest with the individual networks. For example, if the core network might make a recommendation for 2023 to prioritize the goals and strategies in the ELCP that support the workforce. We have a whole outcome area for that, right? So they would make their case with data, they would create opportunities for organizations to come together and plan, but they couldn't force anyone to participate. That's not what we're here to do. What we're trying to build are opportunities to collaborate and integrate our efforts so that we can do more together than we can do alone. Okay, next slide, please. Coordination team cultivates the conditions that enable the network members to do what they want to do in service of the ELCP and in alignment with its vision and values. This administrative role is currently filled by the PDG team with support from Becoming Justice and Cedar River Group. Some of the things we do are like handling the logistics for setting up the website, gathering resources and learnings from the networks. We curate and share information to ensure that people have what they need to advance the work. Okay, I have a visual for us here. So here is the idea of an impact network with some examples on here. As you can see, and as we all know, all of our work is connected, right? So this visual shows 4 large networks. Sorry, there's somebody at my door. My dog is letting them know. It shows the 4 large networks and many smaller networks as an example, just an example, of what the ELCP movement network could look like. So remember, it's a network of networks. We're not trying to create new networks. We're trying to coordinate and integrate them. Nestled in the middle, you'll see the core network, the steering committee, and that is coordinating and connecting the work across the system. And then in the center of that core network is the network coordination team, the administrative support system, if you will. So bringing us back to our overview graphic, now that you have some more details, here in the middle brackets, you see that we now have the plan and the beginning of our coordination structure. And when those 2 things are put together, we end up with the full picture of the early learning coordination plan, an equity-based tool for funding, policy, and programming decisions. I hope that makes sense. It's hard to talk about things that are in process, right? So we thought right now we would take some time on the Jamboard, ask you some questions, do some thought partnering, And so I'm going to turn it over to Delta to get us started on that.
Yeah, thanks, Tracy. I'm going to seem super well prepared here, but Tracy, I cannot remember if these questions are about the core network or the network structure or the plan.
All of it.
Okay.
It's the early learning coordination plan is all the pieces.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I don't know where my brain just went right there, but I could not remember. So I appreciate you coming in with the save. So Abby will put a link to put a link to a Jamboard in the chat, and we'd like you to answer these 3 questions. We figured we'd stay in large group format. If anybody would like to share out loud or raise anything up out loud, we would love to hear it. One of our favorite things about ELAC is the rich conversation that happens here in this space. The Jamboard is really helpful for note taking, so that's the main reason we're using it. That way, when we take your ideas, we have it exactly how you wrote it, and you don't have to worry about us putting our perspective or thoughts on that. So yeah, the 3 questions are: what do we need to be thinking about? What concerns are surfacing? And what are the strengths? And if you go to the Jamboard, you'll notice there's a different slide for each question. And if you haven't used Jamboard before, or if you have, but maybe just don't remember, you just can click the little add sticky note and type in your thoughts. And I'm actually wondering, go ahead, Tracy.
It's in view only mode. Can you put it in edit mode?
Yes, I thought I did.
Thanks. I don't have sticky notes. So after she does that, then if we all just hit refresh.
There we go. It should be on edit.
There they are.
So Tracy and Delta, this, considering it's an 88-page document, doesn't really give us a lot of time. Is it possible for you to work with community engagement to give members additional time to be able to answer these questions after the meeting?
Yes, of course.
Erin, is that something that we can make happen?
Yeah, if that works for Tracy and Delta, we'd be happy to share. We can just include this info with the follow-up email. If that timeline works for Tracy and Delta, we could just keep it open until a deadline. We can touch base on that offline if that works. But yeah, we can definitely support that if that's cool.
All right, thank you for that. I'm just thinking, I know for myself, being able to have more time to be able to look through the document and be able to reflectively answer these questions. I'm just curious, maybe other ELAC members and RAs or even community members who feel that would be helpful. You can just type yes in the chat or thumbs up to see if that would be something that you could do. Thank you very much, Alex, for responding so fast. Thanks, Val.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Lois. That makes a lot of sense. I was actually hoping that maybe we could stop screen sharing so we can all see each other, the few of us that are on screen, but it just makes it a little bit easier to have conversation. And yes, the Jamboard will absolutely remain open. And if you have anything that's coming to the top right now, we would still love to hear it. I think those first impressions can sometimes be, well, I think all impressions are valuable, but the first impressions can really help shed light on where maybe we missed the mark on something. So just to give an example, when we shared this document with our internal folks, one thing that was raised was that there's not enough Indigenous representation in the photography. And that was something that we tried really hard to do. And unfortunately, there is not a lot out there that is not either stereotypical or shows Indigenous cultures that are not from Washington. We really wanted to make sure that we were representing Washington Indigenous culture. And the fact remains that there's not enough Indigenous representation in the document. So that was one thing that somebody gave us as right off the top, this is my first impression. And that's really helpful for us to know. We got to have a great conversation and get some more resources so the website can have more representation. So if anybody has anything, we would love to hear it.
They're so quiet today. Okay, too.
I am trying to practice sitting with the quiet, which is very, very hard for me. If anybody knows me, I struggle with silence. So I'm trying, but I also want to respect your time. And it seems like maybe we don't have any impressions just yet or anything that we want to share just yet. And yes, Colleen, it will remain open. We will keep it open and it will be sent out. Again, I think Aaron said with the after meeting notes and things. And so thanks for the people in the chat who are letting me know I'm not alone and struggling with the silence. So I just want to respect your time. So if there is nothing else, Tracy, I think we could probably wrap up.
Yeah. So as we have been together for the
Can I
last
ask
2
a
years, we
quick
will
question for
continue.
you to at least, because I haven't had a lot of opportunity to, I was looking through this to see if I can find something. So I'm the infant early childhood mental health representative on ELAC, and I guess and I see the network aspects of this, and I can see how infant early childhood mental health, and which actually for me includes early learning, but that's besides the point. How it might be involved in the actual networking part of this as well. I'm wondering about cross systems work, cross systems collaboration, that the needs of children and families in early learning settings is a set of comprehensive needs. So how do we bring mental behavioral health into this conversation, or is it already a part of that? How has that been incorporated into this plan?
It is, okay, there we go, sorry, mute button. It is absolutely incorporated in this plan, and that is the purpose of this plan, is to be comprehensive. And so it includes health, and in health, we include mental health. So you'll see that, I believe, in the families section. So there's 2 sections that it comes out in, the outcome area of strong, safe, supportive families, but also in the health section. So take a look at that. We are and have been involved in lots of conversations, and that will continue to happen and just get more and more organized as the ELCP coordination team gets more organized. And so we're just at the very beginning, at that messy building part of what can this look like. And, you know, ELAC has been there from the very beginning with us on this, and so has IPEL. Next week, we're going to do basically the same thing with provider supports, you know, and so we're always having these conversations, and anytime that you see an opportunity, we are all in for you saying, hey, here's a group that needs to hear about this, you know, or here's somebody who's working on this. Can we connect them? That's the whole point of having the website and having this plan, is bringing people together and creating those opportunities. So I appreciate you bringing that up. It is absolutely at the top of our list in that coordination piece of the plan. We will be back to the next ELAC meeting to dig in a little bit. There's 5 outcome areas. And so one of the things I was thinking about was, like, where do we start when we start thinking about what y'all want to hear first? So maybe we'll put that in the reflection question, you know, that, you know, where should we start? Where do you want to know more first? Because, you know, we're not meeting every month, but yeah, we'll be here again.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Great. Well, thanks for having us. And I do see we have a sticky note on here, which is awesome. That is part of the approach to the core network that I was talking about, where we aren't going to tell people what to do, but create the opportunity for them to opt into it. So looking at this, that's what I think about here, this sticky note that says, this looks great. And I'm wondering if for each of the strategies to be clearly, or for each of the strategies, will they be clearly assigned to the person/organization leader that is the keeper of ensuring the strategy moves forward? Have we thought about that? Will it be kept in? I don't know if there's more, because that's all I can see.
Will it be kept in another space? If you click on it, you can read all of it.
That was mine. This is Deanne. And the thing with a lot of these plans that I find, it all looks great. And then everybody thinks everybody else is the keeper of it. And pretty soon you end up down a path and it's like, oh, I thought you were leading that or whatever. And I frequently find that it's so helpful to have somebody who is the keeper of it, not the owner, but the keeper of the conversation, keeping it on the front burner, because this is a lot of strategies. And so my reaction is without that kind of assignment, if you will, to keep that as you're the keeper of it. I think it gets so lost because you get beyond three to five strategies and you've got even more than that. That's a lot of moving pieces. And a lot of these strategies are super big.
Yeah, no, they totally are. And that's why we had to do a different approach than the way that things have been done before. And that's where the networks are going to be able to hold this, and where the steering committee, which is now our core network, is really going to be those keepers. And so, excuse me, what I can imagine, what we've been talking about is that there would be other groups brought together around the goals, and within the goals you have strategies, right? And so this is just going to keep growing. Those dots on the relationship map, those are going to keep growing as we bring people together around the different goals and strategies. So what's going to be interesting and what we have to put some time in, and we will definitely be leaning on you all too, is to decide where to start. I mean, workforce is honestly at the top of the list locally, throughout the state, federally. So, I could see us saying, all right, we're going to tackle these workforce goals first and start there. But that is something that the core network would decide. That's not something that I would decide. We would do it together so that there is the buy-in and the support for it.
So Tracy and Delta, once we have a little bit more time to go through and post our questions in the Jamboard and that type of thing, how do you plan to respond to the group? Are you planning coming in December possibly, or will it be included in the feedback loop? How is that going to be addressed?
Well, in my experience with this project, the more time we have, the more answers we have, because we're building, right? So the more time we have, the more we'll have built. But we could do both. If there is a question we know the answer to now, we can absolutely put it in the feedback loop. And if not, then that's something we can bring to our conversation in December. We can just go back and connect the dots on that. Will that work for you? If we kind of do both?
It works for me. ELAC members and RAs, does that work for you? I see heads nodding. All right, great. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Tracy and Delta. Colleen, thank you for the thumbs up. All right, good. Well, do you have anything else you want to share, Tracy or Delta, to send us off on our project?
Just our gratitude and how proud I am to, get to partner with you all. You really have had a huge hand in this. I know we have some new members and a little bit of newness going on right now with ELAC, but we couldn't have done this without you. Thanks, and we'll see you in December.
All right,
I'm
sounds
not speaking for
good.
Delta. Delta, you can speak. Okay. Take
Thanks,
care.
Tracy. Delta, do you have anything?
No, nothing other than that. Just also, so much gratitude for this group. And as always, thanks for letting us be here and talk to you and just be in your space for a little bit. It's not the same as when we got to be in a room together, but I still appreciate it in the virtual space. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you both. So just want to remind everybody as we move into our next presentation to please type your questions or comments into the chat box. And for this one, they're asking that once it's over, then they will answer all type questions as well as open it up for any additional questions. So now we are going to have our Early Start Washington Director of Policy and Advocacy, Erica Halleck, and Thurston County Public Health Maternal Child Health Nurse Family Partnership Division Director, Gretchen Thaler. They're going to provide an overview of the 2022 Home Visiting Advisory Committee, as well as share their recommendations that they are going to be giving to DCYF and the legislature as we move into this upcoming biennium session. So Erica and Gretchen, I will turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Lois, and good afternoon. I'm Erica Halleck. A small change. I'm with Start Early, not Early Start, but a lot of days we have early starts, right? So I'm pleased to be joined by my colleague Gretchen Thaler and our colleague Samantha Masters, who is the Home Visiting Advisory Committee's representative on ELAC. So Samantha will be popping in as well. Both Samantha and Gretchen, of course, are doing home visiting work on a day-to-day basis on the ground. So they're the ones that have a much richer insight into the work that's underway. So as Lois mentioned, we were invited to talk a little bit about recommendations that the Home Visiting Advisory Committee worked on for about 15 or so months and submitted to the legislature, the governor, and DCYF late this summer. They related to ways to strengthen the home visiting system. And before we jump into these, we never miss a chance to talk about home visiting because we, of course, love it, which is why we're very passionate about it and would love to talk about it at any opportunity. And we weren't sure what this group's knowledge base was on home visiting, so we thought we'd provide just a couple quick updates. And it looks like Erin already has the quick slideshow going. So if you wouldn't mind changing to the next one. This is information we took from our Home Visiting Advocacy Coalition's one-pager, but home visiting, in short, is a voluntary proven program that supports parents and other caregivers in a child's first year. Here in Washington State, we have a portfolio approach to home visiting, and that means we support a variety of different models. So you'll see that Gretchen works with the Nurse Family Partnership model and Samantha with the Parents as Teachers. There are 7 other models in our state, and they all have different focuses. For example, Nurse Family Partnership, of course, is with the nurse. You would imagine a huge focus on health and birth outcomes. Typically, the nurses engage with families by the 28th week of pregnancy. Others focus on parenting skills and education. A lot of them do similar work in terms of referrals to other services. It's a 2-generation approach where you're working with, of course, the child as well as the parent and caregiver. So these are some of the outcomes we've seen with home visiting. Next slide, please. And this just gives you a sample of what our funding is in home visiting. It's been growing, which is super exciting. These numbers are slightly not updated, but they give you a good picture. In addition to these federal and state dollars, there is significant amount of other funding, largely from the Best Starts for Kids and Early Head Start home-based. And we also have some philanthropic funding. Additionally, in a number of local communities, maybe their county 0.1% for behavioral health or juvenile or justice money supports home visiting as well. Next slide, please. And just to give you a sense of this is the availability of home visiting throughout our state. You'll see it varies. We're working to get those counties that do not have access. We're looking to get their numbers on the board, if you will. What's important to know is that eligibility is pretty broad. It's defined as Medicaid eligible. We're serving about, we estimate, a little less than 10% of eligible families. So we have a long way to go to get to saturation, but we're on our way, and we've been growing it in the past few years. And that is why these recommendations were so important, because as our system's growing, just as in any system, we need to make sure the foundation is strong to support that growth. So you can get a chance to see, if you look around your community, you can see, of course, that the largest number of families served is in King County. Next slide, please. So real quickly, I won't spend too much time on this, but we have a unique structure in our state with regard to our home visiting funding. We have a home visiting services account that requires all federal and state and private dollars be deposited into that account. We have about, I think it's 48 programs now. The slide says 44, but we had an expansion this summer serving these families. The home visiting services account just focuses on that state and federal dollars. So if you saw the previous slide, you're like, wait a minute, that number was much larger. That's because that number includes those Best Starts for Kids, early Head Start, home based, et cetera. We have a number of different funding sources, so which makes it very complex for our friends at DCYF to administer, as well as for the agencies to implement, because there's a lot of red tape, which, is just inherent with all these publicly funded programs. But the major funding source is called MCV. You may have heard of that. That's the Federal Maternal Infant Early Childhood Home Visiting Program. It is up for reauthorization at the federal level, and the House recently initiated and is passing through legislation to not only reauthorize, but increase funding, increase a tribal set aside. So that's exciting. We've been growing our state general fund. There are some Fair Starts for Kids Act dollars. We also receive a portion of the cannabis or marijuana funding as part of that prevention focus, as well as some temporary assistance or TANF dollars. So we can get to the next slide. And I think I'm going to throw it over to Gretchen.
Okay, thanks, Erica. So in the 2021 adopted state budget, they directed the Home Visiting Advisory Committee, which was established by RCW, to submit recommendations to DCYF and the legislature by June 1st of 2022. And these were strategies for improving equity in the home visiting system and ensuring skilled and sustainable workforce. Which was definitely a challenge during COVID. Like many people, we all experienced a loss of workforce and then serving additional families. So the Home Visiting Advisory Committee includes home visiting experts, government and health department representatives, tribal liaisons, service providers, and the research and evaluation experts. And in the last 2 years, our HVAC group, with several subcommittees, we worked on developing recommendations that focused on 3 different areas. So one is the workforce development. We want to make sure that staff that we retain staff and that we are able to get them the training that supports the work. And then true cost of services, and then data enhancement. Implementing these recommendations are within DCYF's purview, but some will involve additional investment by the legislature. Next slide, please. And then, oh, you got this one, Erica?
Yeah, I think we're gonna tag team these. I'll just make a note when you hear the call for for workforce supports and investments. That likely isn't a surprise to any of you, regardless of what your primary focus is. I think I've been saying workforce will be the policy and budget item facing our legislature in 2023. So it's not a huge surprise that the workforce challenges are hitting, of course, our home visitors as well. So we were real excited. I should note that the DCYF decision package recognized that in home visiting and included funding to address that. But real quickly, we're going to go through an overview of the recommendations. We can provide a link to the full recommendations. I realize we were remiss in not doing that. If you'd like to take a look. Additionally, Start Early Washington, we developed a summary. If you just want to read the kind of Cliff Notes version, maybe I see Belisa's on, maybe she could put that link in the chat. But overall, with regard to these recommendations, you won't be surprised. We all had a lot of them and ideas to strengthen the system and make it more equitable. We spent a lot of time talking about how do we really enhance a community engagement process that both centers family and community voice as well as provider voice. Again, this is a theme we're seeing and a growing importance of something that is I would think we can all agree long past due. So that was a central focus of all of our recommendations, is how do we center community, parent, and provider voice. We also talked, and you'll see this, a focus on how can we reach those under-resourced communities and BIPOC families as well as providers. Again, when we go back to that map, you can see there are swaths where there are not services, and largely those are in rural communities with very few service providers. So there's a huge focus on how can we reach those families and those communities who face different challenges, whether it's a mountain pass that prevents travel during the winter, et cetera. But how can we reach those communities? And additionally, there's a huge focus on growing our workforce so that they meet and provide cultural match to the families served. So how is the workforce and the provider groups met? So that was a big part of the discussion. I'll kick back to you, Gretchen.
Okay, so and with that workforce development, yeah, like Erica said, making sure that we have wages that specifically address racial and positional wage disparities. And this, I think, is it's really a really important piece. During COVID, we started to see, a lot of families struggling, as I'm sure all of you have seen as well. Just there was more and more challenges, and staff grew tired and very weary during that time. And so making sure that we're able to provide a wage that matches the level of skill to do this work and support families that are struggling. And then building in time for home visitors to access professional development as well.
Great. And the true cost of service, we won't dive too much into this because this is really wonky, but home visiting is unique in that there isn't a rate, like you might have in Working Connections or ECAP. There are different, basically the local programs negotiate with DCYF on an amount. So it makes that a little more complex and complicated, but we have growing recognition. Again, this won't be a surprise to anyone on this meeting that the contracted amounts do not reflect the true cost of providing the service and providing a quality service that builds in all of those workforce supports, not only wages, but professional development and other support. So the agency has underway a cost study that will help identify what that true cost of service is. Kick it back to you, Gretchen.
Thank you. And then last is data enhancement recommendations. So the models, most models require a lot of data collection. So home visitors are, not only doing the work of meeting with the family and providing support, and but then when they leave that visit, or even during the visit, they're collecting a lot of data that then has to be entered into a system. We rely on that data to meet the model's needs, but then also for the state to be able to pull that data out to give an indication of how the work is going and what outcomes we are reaching. So we are striving to give a lot of attention to making sure that we're not duplicating efforts with data. So like Erica mentioned, many of us have a number of different funding sources. And so we are having to collect data, not only for the model, but each of the funding sources at times too. And, looking at the requirements to make sure that they're really necessary. Is this a piece of data that really helps to tell the story about home visiting? And then increasing the capacity within the programs to manage and use data. It takes a lot of time to make sure that data is in well and make sure it's quality, and that we are able to pull it out and learn things about our own programs, about the populations we're serving and how we're doing at reaching certain measures. So all of these recommendations are really important and will hopefully just improve all of the work that everybody is doing.
So I will just note that while the recommendations they're extensive, we did already see a number of them reflected in the DCYF decision packages, which went to the Governor's Office of Financial Management for a request in the upcoming budget. So that was good to see. The recommendations did have some staging in them about what was more immediate and longer term, because clearly it would be impossible to implement all the recommendations in a short time frame. So the Home Visiting Advisory Committee, we meet, I think, every other month or quarterly. I can't remember. I know we have a meeting on Thursday, and we'll be owning these, if you will, and continually looking at implementation and other strategies. And then from the advocacy side for Start Early and our colleagues, we'll be working at the legislative level again in conjunction with DCYF to work to see some of these come to fruition. And before we ask for questions, I think it's important if Samantha, do you want to add from your perspective and your work on this?
You nailed it, Erica and Gretchen, actually. I think the other thing to mention was just that there was, even pre-COVID, a lot of data about the workforce development. There was a huge study that was done. And so a lot of these things have been talked about in HVAC for even more than the 15 months that you mentioned. So these are topic areas that we've been talking about and trying to find solutions to for a really long time. So it's really exciting to finally have these recommendations and be able to submit them and start working on implementing.
Thanks, Samantha.
I think, Lois, we're open for questions.
All right, thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions for Erica or Gretchen? And Erica, I apologize. That's what happens when you're reading as opposed to going with what you know.
No worries.
Because I know it is Start Early. So I'm smiling at that myself. I'm like, I knew that. So I had to chuckle though. It's always good to be able to laugh at yourself.
Indeed.
So does anyone have any questions for the dynamic duo?
All right.
So Erica, I guess I do, as far as from this group, what do you need? What do you guys, I know you want questions, but how do you want us to support? What exactly is your ask of ELAC?
That's a great question. I think we were asked to keep this group updated on the work. And of course, Samantha is here representing the Home Visiting Advisory Committee. I think as home visiting is a critical part of the early learning continuum and the framework, I think as as you're providing recommendations to the agency and the legislature, how can home visiting fit into that? I think just considering how, in terms of, as we're looking at better areas to integrate, as we're looking at different referral patterns, et cetera. So how, just as you're looking at your overall task with strengthening the system, how can this play in and be even better connected? I don't know, Gretchen or Samantha have a response.
I would just add, just the partnership and understanding the work, and then also, just that saying it takes a village, and I think the partnership between all of us only enhances just the emotional and social growth for children. So.
And I'll just note, it's the same families, right? So these families that are in home visiting often get referred to ECAP programs or ESIT programs. So it all relates. And of course, childcare.
And if any of our members wanted to just kind of sit in on one of your meetings, are they still virtual? And can you share that information with CE? They can include it in the feedback loop for those who might want to pop in. Is that possible?
I can answer that. Our advocacy coalition, we have a very open, so anyone would be welcome to come to that. I'll put my email in the chat, and if folks want to join that or just set up a time to learn more, dive into this a little bit more, because I know it's hard when you've been meeting all day to go into something toward the end. So I'm also happy to meet, set up a one-on-one.
And this is Laura Alfani, also with DCYF. Thanks, Erica, for noting that. The Home Visiting Advisory Committee is meeting every other month, actually same cadence, I think, as ELAC, on the same weeks on Thursdays. And we have some staff support from community engagement. I think, Lois, that's what you were referring to as CE, is that right? And so, yeah, we can share Zoom links and make sure the information is available. The Home Visiting Advisory Committee has a page within the Community Engagement Advisory Committee section of DCYF's website. We haven't been as proactive at getting Zoom links out ahead of time for the public, but we're going to try to do that this year, starting this week, actually, getting it posted hopefully today. Not that people will be able to participate, but yes, we're trying to do better linkages across those systems. And thanks, Erica and Samantha and Gretchen.
All right, thank you, Laura.
Thanks for having us.
So, well, hold on, don't go yet. We still have you for a few minutes. I just want to double check and see if there are any other questions from our team members.
I just want to say I appreciate you taking the time to meet with us to provide information about the work that you're doing. I know that, especially as it relates to the true costs associated with service, that is something that a group of us in King County have been having some conversation around as well. So it's just helpful to hear about these efforts at this level as well.
We can all learn from each other as we.
All righty, thank you so much, Erica, Gretchen, and of course, Samantha. Just wanted to give pause and give folk a little bit of time to unmute. But I see folk are sharing thank yous in the chat. So I just want to let you know how much I appreciate the work that you're doing for our families and children, along with the rest of the ELAC team. So ELAC members and RAs and community advocates. We are going to ask you to help us reflect on today's meeting. If you look in the chat, you'll see the mentee is in there. And so if you would just please weigh in on how you felt today's meeting, went. Was it productive? And was it a good use of your time? Jessica, let me know when the responses begin to slow down. I want to thank everybody for being here today. And again, thank Enrica for handling the morning piece, as well as the community engagement team. All right, so let's go to our next part of closing out today. If you would share one or more words in our word cloud, describing how you're feeling walking away from today's meeting. I know we had some announcements earlier in the executive session. I was there, but as well as the public, about staffing changes, along with all the DCYF around Deanna's leaving. And just want to see how everyone's feeling, just checking in. And while you're participating in that, should be in the chat. Just want to remind everybody that our next ELAC meeting is scheduled for December 6th. So just make sure and block that time off on your calendar. All right, Jessica just said they're slowing down. Does anyone have any last minute comments or things to share about work that you're doing or anything else that might be for the good of everyone before we adjourn? All right, Enrica. Oh, go ahead.
I don't know if
Go
anybody
ahead.
else here is on the P5 work group, but just wanted to, do we actually normally share out that kind of information? Anyways, I'm on the P5 work group, and we're working on additional asks for the funding for emergency funds, as well as in increasing the size of mental health consultants that are available in the state. So the hope is that those services and funds will be made available in the future, and hoping to keep it continuing to grow.
Thank you very much for sharing that out. Anyone else? Anute, if you have any information about the P5 work group, again, if that's a group that folk can pop into, feel free to drop it into the chat. If folk are interested in finding out a little bit more about that work. So we'll give him a few minutes to drop that, seconds to drop that in the chat.
It's been an open work group, but I can, I'll put my email address into the chat if you're interested in that. I can connect you.
All right, thank you so much. All right, all. So for those who want to capture just email address, it's there in the chat. I want to thank everyone today for being engaged and participating until the end. We're going to give you back the gift of time today to stretch and maybe enjoy what's left of our unseasonably warm October. So we'll see everyone in December, and I hope I won't have to say unseasonably cold because we know how our Northwest can be on the other side of these warm Octobers. Enrica, anything to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say thank you, everyone. We recognize these are long meetings, and we appreciate you giving of your time for these meetings. Thank you.
All right, all. Have a good rest of your day. Goodbye.